most communication apps are completely surveilled, period. Like if you're talking, someone else has the ability to read it if they're not doing it, if they're not harvesting it and reading it already. Anything you do within a community, whether it be like business, personal relationships, sending money overseas to your families, depending on what they're doing, like all this stuff, like it involves some type of communication about coordinating whatever you're doing. And that should be private. That should be secure by default. And then people have the ability to broadcast out or share stuff at their own will within their own context.
Layer 1 is a podcast and community dedicated to helping you master all things crypto. We'll be bringing you the best interviews with project executives, technical analysis for trading of the most popular cryptocurrencies, and insight into what's actually happening behind the scenes.
As you join us each episode, you're going to hear about tokens, fundraisers, investments, and even crypto conspiracies. But please remember that nothing we say should be considered financial or legal advice.
Come join us on this journey, and welcome to Layer 1.
Good morning, good evening, good night. It's another episode of Layer 1. We are coming to you on a Thursday. This episode should be dropping on Friday, so I hope you're having a good Friday this week. I have two wonderful gentlemen here sitting with me. We're going to have a fabulous interview about status. Before we get to Dr. Corey Petty, we are going to talk to Dimitri in his room that's looks almost exactly the same as last time. You keep it in good order.
Yeah, I know. I have a housekeeping lady here that keeps it clean, and I have to be quiet because they'll kick me out of this library. But yeah, I'm super excited about this interview today. We have an exciting guest. Q, who do we have?
Yeah, like I said, we had Dr. Corey Petty here. He is the Chief Security Officer at Status, so I would love to hear about his role there. So, Corey, is it okay if I call you Corey here on the episode?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, Corey, how are you doing today?
I am doing well. I've always kind of found it funny as people ask the question about like, how are you doing amidst this pandemic? And it's par for the course for kind of how I live my life anyway. So here we go. Keep trucking on.
Yeah, it's us in crypto. We're not missing a beat here. So we're definitely excited to have you on today. We're going to talk all things status. We're going to talk everything privacy, as well as messaging and all the different things you guys offer within status. Before the episode, I did a lot of research on what you guys are doing, a couple of your interviews and maybe speeches at events. And I'm excited to talk about maybe things that I guess from a macro view, we have kind of an understanding of what we're doing on the internet, but from the background and all the infrastructure there, you have a very good experience. But let's start off with your background here and how you found yourself, maybe into crypto, into blockchain.
Yeah, sure. So let's see. So it all started when I was doing my PhD candidacy at Texas Tech. And
Go Red Raiders.
Yeah, get your guns out. So only place that has guns as the mascot. Good stuff. Yeah, so I was doing my PhD candidacy, and I was always curious. It was in high performance computing, chemistry, and physics, like a bastardization of all three of these things. And I've always been fascinated and in love with computers and been building them since I was about 7. And I think, as most college kids do when they don't have anything else to do, I watched a lot of TED Talks because those were really popular back then. And I saw one about money, and it happened to be about Bitcoin, which I had not heard of in the past. And it fascinated me and went down the proverbial rabbit hole after that, learned a bunch about how Bitcoin works, the computational problem it was solving in terms of like the double spin problem and trustlessness. Learned about proof of work, read the white paper, did all the research. I was sold. Started a mining operation in my house. Nothing serious, just like a couple GPUs on a board, just to learn, to help like facilitate me learning how it all works and what's necessary and maintenance and all that. And got some friends into it and kept researching. And after I graduated, I went to Brazil for a few years and had sold my miner and kind of stopped that, but continued to kind of keep up with what was going on and so on and so forth. And my buddies wanted to try and stay in contact, the guys who I had done mining with. And so he's like, well, we're not mining. what are we going to do? Let's start a podcast. So we started the Bitcoin Podcast Network back then in a Facebook group, and slowly figured out what we were doing and learned. But like what that did was kept my finger on the pulse of what this whole industry was doing. Allowed me to talk to people, understand what they were doing. I had researched a lot so I could stay up to date and knowledgeable for the audience, and so on and so forth. And that really kept me passionate about all this stuff while I was working in academia. I then left academia to pursue a career in blockchain, quote unquote blockchain, however you want to call it, through the lens of a data scientist, because what I had studied and done was very minimal to data science and blockchain, based on like computational analysis and things like that. And I found a few jobs here in the DC area, working for government contractors, doing kind of blockchain education to people who were cleared, as well as coming up with novel use cases or interesting ways of using the same technology or parts of the technology. And then randomly, I was talking with Jared, the CEO of and co-founder of Status. We had become friends through like a ICO distribution analysis paper that I did and published. He's figured out the type of work I did, and they were looking for a security officer, and I joined and never looked back.
Yeah, what has your experience been kind of creating that podcast? Just from a personal perspective, we obviously host our own podcast here at Layer One, and we've had experiences with a lot of people in the industry. It definitely gives us an opportunity to talk with a broad kind of depth of people within the industry. What was your experience kind of starting that podcast, and how far did you go down the education rabbit hole with teaching people about Bitcoin?
A lot, in all aspects. So like the experience of starting the podcast was wonderful. It gave me a reason to keep up with what was going on, understand it fundamentally so that I could explain it online. I think that's one of like the Feynman methods for education is learn by teaching, right? And the process of trying to figure out how to teach something, you really figure out what your inadequacies are in terms of understanding, which gave me a kind of leg up. And then like using that in the government contractors that I worked for, like, and building curriculum for them to understand like the real nuts and bolts of the Bitcoin blockchain, really helped me kind of solidify my understanding of how all this stuff works. And then the podcast has just been an amazing experience of growing a community, and doing it in a way that like I've always been like uncompromisingly myself, if that makes sense. And so when you do something and you act that way, you tend that the community that is the result ends up being like-minded individuals. And so they ended up becoming like the passion that spurs the podcast. But also, I don't know what else you can do in this world where you can simultaneously reach out to anyone you want to ask them any questions you want to, and have one-on-one conversations, and everyone involved, including the people who you listen to it, thank you for it. Like more often than not, that's the hard part, right? Making those contacts, talking with people, asking them questions that you care about, as opposed to like the FAQ that they posted on the webpage. And so like the podcast has been wonderful in that regard.
We really appreciate you kind of posting authentic content. I really didn't before the episode or, before my research know about the Bitcoin podcast, but definitely going to subscribe. I think there's kind of a dearth of good and authentic crypto content that's out there, even blockchain content itself. So I do appreciate you kind of taking that task on and kind of holding that flag up for parts of the industry. So thank you for that. I do kind of want to go into Status. Obviously, we're going to make our way there. But beforehand, when I'm watching interviews and I'm seeing your events, you're talking about this client server infrastructure that is kind of the backbone of even what we're doing today on Zoom, right? But like the whole internet itself. So kind of break that down, give us a good summary of how, maybe give us like a better understanding of what goes on in the background and how communication is involved in what we're doing on a day-to-day process.
Yeah, I'd love to. This has been something I've been trying to put into words nicely for a number of years, and that's based on the kind of how my understanding and continual education on how the internet actually works. It's like particularly with like how the computers connect to each other in order to facilitate the internet, right? Like allow us to use applications that we're so comfortable using. And most of that, like the vast majority of that, is based on what's called the client-server model, where the applications that are built are live on some server, somebody's computer somewhere. Most often than not, now it's the cloud. The cloud is just a fancy word for someone else's computer. And when you access these things, you have some device, whether it be your mobile, tablet, or desktop, basically types in a domain in a web browser. That domain goes through the DNS system and says, all right, which computer in the world serves this thing? All right, cool. My device is going to make a connection to that thing and then get the content. And so what happens is you have kind of this hub and spoke model that grows from that, of servers that are hosting all of the content and just managing people who want to get access to it and view it. And when you build up infrastructure like this, like specifically towards a hub and spoke, you build applications on top of that, which provide convenience or utility to humans to do things. It leads towards a specific type of kind of consequence. And those consequences are kind of the bane of what we're seeing today on the internet. Like as it's grown to a point of becoming a pivotal part of everyone's life and how we get about in terms of convenience, communication, etc. We have these kind of side effects that we didn't quite intend when we started building it this way. And that is like, one of the main things that I think about is the like offloading of responsibility as a natural tendency in humans is, it's no longer my problem. If I want to do something, I try and ask someone to do it. And if something goes wrong, I then ask them to fix it. And you think about like your bank account, for instance, right? I forgot my password to my bank account. Bank account, can you fix that for me? Something happened with my card. I don't like it. Bank account, can you return that money to me? My money? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, ad nauseum. Or like something's happening on my social media account. Facebook, can you fix that for me? Or Google, can you fix that for me? Like no longer is it my responsibility to really do anything. I just ask the people, the custodians of me, my digital me, to take care of it for me. And I think this is a direct consequence of the underlying architecture in which these computers connect to each other. And blockchain in general, in my opinion, is like a wholesale move away from that, in the sense that the way we're connecting computers is not delegating the information, the processing, the data to live on a central server, and then I access that thing. And request it to do what I want it to do. I'm holding on to the value and using kind of a network of automation to then do what I would like to do, and it distributes the power in a lot of ways. Like when people talk about decentralization, they don't talk about what they're decentralizing. And that lens is very important to me. So like when you think about good, trustless, open, decentralized networks, you're distributing the power that exists and the ability for any single individual or small group of individuals to make overwhelming consequences to the community that lives on that network. When you have central authorities and organizations and companies that have grown with the traditional internet, they end up becoming this massive hub of power. You think about what Facebook can do, or like where your digital identity lives in Google and things like that. Like they can turn it off in a snap. And when they have that amount of power, they then tend to move from their original ideals of don't be evil to we'll make some compromises here, because they have that power. And I think a lot of the kind of ideals in a more decentralized architecture is can't be evil. We're building it in such a way where I no longer have the ability to make those decisions or have drastic effects on a very broad community.
Yeah, absolutely, and I agree. With you on all those points. The problem that we tend to kind of face in our industry is that when you shift that responsibility to people, they tend to not be, let's say, very familiar with the way that things work, and therefore, like they'll, let's say, use the wrong address, or let's say their wallet gets hacked because they got phished or whatnot. Right? There's no like repercussions on certain issues like that. So the majority of the kind of the users in the population that don't really understand it yet, and would love to, let's say, participate in something like this and move the privacy forward, but they're like taking a step back because, hey, in case something happens, I can't recoup, let's say, my funds, or it puts a lot of responsibility on people. So how do in your thoughts, how would you get the population to kind of shift to this and promote this privacy, and shift the responsibility on the user, where people are kind of lazy? They used to the central powers kind of do all these convenient things for them, and in case they mess up, it's okay, they'll revert back on whatnot. There's some repercussion, like steps that you can take to recover, like like you mentioned, password and funds. And also, like the platform right now that exists is not really user friendly for a lot of people to use, right? And my grandma and my mom, it's not, it's hard for them to really get into this and start, like, keeping the wallets or keep it on a hardware wallet and whatnot. So how do we break through this and make it user friendly enough where we onboard those users and start shifting that power away from the central into the decentralized and trustless kind of network?
Oh, what a great question. I really love this concept, and I have opinions on it that I don't think are talked about very much. And it's about this transition happens over like a long period of time, and we're relatively early in it. And there's responsibilities in all parties in terms of how it gets there. And a big part of that is like a social change. For instance, like there's this, like we've built up this intuition of best practices naturally as humans in real life. If I walk into a room full of people I don't know and I take out a wad of cash, throw it on the counter, and walk away, that's going to make everyone feel very uncomfortable. Like, right? Like if I do that, everyone's like, that's not a good idea. Like, because we all understand like kind of where value exists, how to treat it, what not to do, like all these like social things, that social cues of how to manage risk in real life. And we don't have that in the digital ecosystem whatsoever. Like when people do the equivalent of walking into a room of unknowns and throwing it down a bunch of value and then expecting it to be there when you get back after leaving the room, the whole room isn't staring at it being like, what are you doing, man? Why are you doing that? Right. So like, it's going to take a while to build that, those intuitions, especially when we're only just now making the tools and making them reasonably usable in terms of key management, because all of this stuff is just applied key management. And we've seen through the old PGP days that like, that's a hard problem to solve. And so like, I think on one spoke, it needs to be a social shift and people actually asking the right questions and thinking about the right things with respect to risk on the internet. And blockchain has done a tremendous amount of work there in forcing people to start thinking about these questions. Like I said earlier, like,
go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, finish the thought, please.
Yes, like I was saying earlier, like centralized infrastructure leads to applications which have emergent properties of people offloading that responsibility to somebody else. That's not teaching those social cues and thoughts and best practices of being a citizen of the internet. None of that is. It's saying, don't worry about it. Do whatever you want to do. We'll take care of it, which is a terrible mentality to teach when you're trying to build communities on the internet. And so that like it takes a while for that shift to change. And the responsibility on the other side of the hand, in terms of application developers and the protocol developers and things like that, is trying to make it like reasonably useful and easy to make that shift, to give people enough options and information at the right time for them to make the right decisions for themselves, because they no longer have the power to do it on behalf of the user.
Yeah, I guess some of the devil's advocate of this conversation that we're having is that like there is some portion of offloading responsibility that's good, right? In
Yeah.
today's society, like I'm lucky that I don't have to make my own toilet paper and have it in my house. Although no one has toilet paper now anyways, but I'm just lucky that I don't have to do all of these things that, I don't have to create the bed myself. I don't have to do all these things myself. So there is an argument to be made there, but I like that taking that to the nth degree and just saying everything, it should be someone else's responsibility is not what should be happening, especially on the internet. And people should have kind of more education about what the actual goings on the internet is. So, we kind of made it up to status, and we talked about the principles, the principal problems that have led to maybe the creation of status. So what is status essentially, and what problems or what solutions do you have to the problems that we've already talked about? And then kind of break down how status is more of an ecosystem in and of itself. It's not just a singular app. It's kind of grown into a ecosystem of itself.
Great. I want to answer that, but first, before I do that, I want to mention something you just said, which kind of sets the context for a lot of that, in my opinion. I agree. I think the majority of the early blockchain industry was a full swing away from traditional internet architecture, right? It went from centralize all the things to decentralize all the things. And we don't care what things should actually be in terms of human communication, right? In my opinion, the reality is somewhere in the middle, but options for everyone to conduct themselves how they'd like to, right? In some cases, depending on what your priorities are or what you care about, you want to centralize things and offload that responsibility. But having the ability to opt out is crucial. And I think that's the foundation that Status is trying to build, is providing communication infrastructure. And when I say communication, I'm lumping in value transactions, digital value transactions into that. Building that infrastructure in such a way where things can be built on top that'll give people the options to build, participate in communities that they would like to be in the way they'd like to be in them with, right? And so that means in order to do that, you need those three pillars that Status provides. That is you need a way to manage your keys, which is what we refer to as a wallet. So you need that key management system and infrastructure to kind of separate the different contexts you use various things for. Like we have a key for identity, and it's kind of like your chat key. And you can attest certain things to that to then build up who you are digitally on the internet, but it's just a key. And then you have keys for wallet management in terms of value accounts. So where you store your Bitcoin, Ethereum, tokens, et cetera, that's all just a key. And so, but you need the ability to have intuitive interfaces that allow you to figure out okay, well, this value goes with this key for this purpose, or I'm separating these things because they're very different risk profiles. But people don't think in those words, right? They're this is my chat key, this is my savings, this is my walking around money, right? And so you need to build interfaces that allow people to do the cryptography, but in a way that's comfortable to them. And then, so that's the key management part. You also need an ability to use it. You need to be able to move funds and crypto around and interact with these applications that kind of facilitate this key management. That's what we call decentralized applications. So we have a browser inside Status. Right now, I'm just talking about the application itself, which you can download on the App Store. At the browser, which I think gives you access to the wonderful world of Web3, and that's both the traditional web. You can browse whatever website you're typically browsing, but you can also browse these decentralized applications where you can inject your various accounts in ways and interact with them, whether it be exchanging tokens, using the Web3 version of Twitter, whatever ends up being built. It's going to need a way to have access to your keys that's safe and secure. And so that's part of the Web3 experience in the browser. And then you have like ephemeral communication or chat. And that needs to be built on a foundation of privacy and security. And so I try to tell people like the blockchain is a social network. Any network, any of the blockchain networks are social networks. But all you see on them and what's captured on them right now is like the history of the communication and relationship that happened. It's like the footprint of all the social stuff that happened. And all the social stuff that happened is like done elsewhere in other channels through a myriad of chat applications or business relationships and so on and so forth. And so like, in order to like really capture all these things, you need some type of place to talk about that communication. And that's messaging. And so when you have these three things together, there's like a world of things you can do in terms of building communities, talking with people, doing transactions, and it's all kind of seamlessly put together so that it feels more comfortable. And I guess our job from here is to like, once we have a foundation of these things, is to come up with cool new ways of building communities, talking with each other, facilitating conversation that either haven't been done or have been done, but we can do it better because we've added these other components into it. Most of what you see now in app stores or traditional web is a slice of what I've just described. It's, you know, you can chat, but if you want to use crypto, you got to use something else. You can browse Web3, but you can't chat. Like stuff like this. And we're trying to offer it all in one, so you no longer have to like use multiple applications to get the thing done.
In general, for people, you know, that are looking to communicate, right? They tend to not put value on privacy nowadays. And you know, even though we had like the Facebook instance, you know, where, you know, there was a lot of stuff in the media where, hey, your data is getting exploited, gets sold and so on, right? And, you know, the government can track your messaging, listen to your calls, all of that stuff. But it seems like, you know, we tend to kind of, you know, forget that or avoid it and like, okay, that kind of passed, you know, nothing is happening. So, you know, what do you think is going to take for people to really take this very serious and start switching to these applications for privacy? You know, does it need to be some extreme that impacts them, every single person kind of in the country, where maybe, you know, due to economic times, you know, bad economic times, you know, maybe the government is going to be very controlling and limit, you know, and track what people are doing, you know, like we're seeing kind of in China, things are going on there with surveillance, you know, but yet people are still kind of, you know, stuck in that system, and they're not moving over to something that's more private. What do you think it will take, you know, for something like this, for people to really start taking this serious and start, you know, shifting to these private communication, you know, applications, rather than kind of decentralizing, going along with the government or going along with the surveillance that's going on right now?
It depends. Depends on who it is and where they are. Like most people tend to say they don't care until it affects them. Most of us in the Western world, it doesn't really affect us too much. There's a relatively large amount of freedom associated with how we can conduct our lives, and a lack of consequences for doing things imposed on us by others. And a lot of other places in the world, that's certainly not the case. There's a tremendous amount of censorship. There's a tremendous amount of tyranny, and the way an individual conducts their lives is heavily influenced and dictated by others. And in some cases, they don't even know it, right? Because they haven't had access to anything outside of it. For those people, it really matters. It's a tremendous difference between having free, unfettered access to information and the ability to communicate without consequence versus not. And for everyone else, I think it's starting to become something that's on their mind. I think 10 years ago, if you asked someone whether or not they thought they were being spied on, their answer would not necessarily be as leaning towards the absolutely as it is today. Granted, we also have surveillance machines in our houses, like on purpose. And we call it Alexa and Google Home, right? Like we're purposefully using these things, and they are listening to every conversation we have. As opposed, previously, it's all a spy novel in terms of having your phone get tapped. But like in the background, everyone understands that there is surveillance, there is a means of kind of like they're giving up their data to someone else. It's just right now, I don't think they haven't, like most of the people who don't care haven't been impacted in a way that's against them or like that hurts them. If things go extra dystopian and the powers that we're giving up during this pandemic don't get given back and they get taken advantage of, that movement to caring might get a little accelerated. But once again, like we want to provide there has to be an option for people to opt out that's useful, that's easy to use, that gives people the ability to conduct themselves the way they want to when they get to the decision that they care. And on the other half, so I think that's kind of like making sure that we provide an option for those who need it and who want it. And on the other half of the people who don't care and probably won't care, we can really make their quality of life, privacy, and security better just by default, right? If you have, and this is a kind of the same analogy I use a lot, if you have a foundation that is constrained, everything you build on top of it will also be just as constrained, if not more. So it's really, really difficult to build a decentralized ecosystem on top of a centralized one, because it like the power is at the bottom, and the ability to manipulate everything on top of it is still there. But the flip side is certainly not true. You can build centralized systems on top of a decentralized one. But you still, like when you do it that way, you still have the ability to opt out and use something that works the way you want it to. Whereas you can't do that if it's built from the ground up with constraints. And so like if we built that, then eventually you can have the exact same thing that people don't care about, that offers the same level of convenience and usability and so on and so forth that they're used to, that they don't care about. But the moment that something happens and they start to care, they should always have the ability to opt out. We have to build that infrastructure.
Yeah, I like that
That's
example.
what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I like that example that you just used of creating that structure, that decentralized structure on the bottom, and then piling centralized services on top. Because I think most people are going to tend towards something that's more usable, that has more utility, that's cooler, quote unquote. People are going to continue to use these services that they want to use until maybe something negative happens. And so I'm glad that you brought up that dystopian future part, because we're somewhat conspiracy theorists on this podcast, and I do kind of want to get your guesstimation, maybe your estimate of 10 to 20 years. Maybe do we end up in this dystopian future? What side do you kind of take in this argument of, are people going to, are the mass populace going to actually kind of understand this kind of self-sovereignty before maybe the government steps in and takes and uses these tools that technology is allowing them to now do?
10 to 20 years, or will we be dystopian?
Well, any timeline.
No, I don't think so. I can see a path where that heads that way. But if any of this is successful, we're going to build standards around humans understanding digital risk and digital value. And then being able to ask the right questions, learn the right things, to then use the tools they care that facilitates what they care about the most. That conversation and understanding is just starting now. And governments are going to be governments. Dictators are going to be dictators. Like those will always exist because we're humans. Like government needs to function, and it needs to function by pulling resources from the jurisdictions that it governs over. That's never going to change. Like even in smaller communities, like there's still governance associated with any community. And that is usually like at the cost, like the attempt of it is to better the community at the cost of resources within that community. Now, as it currently stands, there's a lot of asymmetry in power and how that operates, especially as you get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, because you have to start layering those things above. Like a lot of what the decentralization process is like re-looking at this type of thing and saying what part of that power can we automate out or not trust humans to take care of because it's shown they're quite greedy. And for one reason or another, I'm not going to speculate as to why, but like, I think a lot of this is just rethinking how we govern each other, how power gets distributed, what influence others should have on one another. And it's particularly in the concept of like a digital domain, which is a relatively new thing for humans. It's way easier to govern when you like can't send a message across the world, whether it be like because you have ultimate power of information, or like you're not overwhelmed with what everyone else is doing and you only care about what's going on in your local community. Like that's no longer the case. And so a lot of what we're trying to build is ways to manage all of this ridiculous amounts of information and power and how it gets distributed and so on and so forth. And so like I don't think it's gonna get worse. It's just gonna be kind of fumbling as we figure out how to do this better and better.
Yeah, that's no, it's super interesting. Going back to status and the messaging app that you guys have, you can transfer value over the messaging app. One thing that we talk about on Layer One quite often is kind of like the issues that are going on right now in distressed countries. And you've lived in Brazil. Maybe you can share a little bit of your experience living there, and what is the economic situation was there, when you were there. But right now that we have a kind of global slowdown, and some of the countries are experiencing hyperinflation, and we've seen instances where people kind of get boxed into where they can't really withdraw cash from the banks or move money away, let's say, from their currency that's experiencing hyperinflation into something better. So the governments tend to kind of limit the movement of money when certain things happen, like crisis, and so on. So it puts on kind of hardship on people to deal with these problems, and keeps them as a hostage in that country, basically, to suffer through like these financial hard times and economic downturns and so on. And we often talk about how there are really no on-ramps for these countries, for those people that are looking to opt into, let's say, to buy Bitcoin or buy crypto, or move away from fiat, that's experiencing huge hyperinflation, to get into something like that and maybe preserve their capital, or even enable just the movement of their capital, away from the certain restrictions from the governments that are trying to keep it all together. So what are your thoughts on like where we are now in terms of like maybe having on ramps in distressed countries? Do we have enough that will translate demand right now for, like, let's say, Bitcoin or the crypto from these distressed countries, or is it still kind of limited, and people are still kind of can't access that market when really they're the ones who actually benefit the most?
Yeah, you see kind of price discovery in these locations change drastically because the demand is so much higher and because of the need is so much higher, right? So like these places that need Bitcoin to survive, like Venezuela, like you'll see the price of Bitcoin there be drastically higher than everywhere else in the world, which opens up room for arbitrage. But like it's because the demand is so high and the supply is so low, because there's constraints on these on and off ramps, like heavy constraints and consequences for using them. And so like status is trying to help here in a lot of ways. One, by once again, like providing the tools and infrastructure for people to create community money. Like if you think about why people need on and off ramps, it's because they need to conduct their lives to survive. They get paid in something. They need to buy their groceries. They need to do like these things with some type of money, and it's usually like a fiat money. And so they need on and off ramps to like use as a storage of value until like everything that they need to do in order to survive can happen within the same ecosystem. So eventually you have like just like a community money. And we've seen some smaller pockets of people do this, where they just rally around, agree that a specific token is what they're going to use to like use within their community as money, and they can get along quite nicely. And status can facilitate that completely. You don't need any on and off ramps for that. And crypto does a really good job of that, especially in terms of like keeping track of who has what and ownership and dependencies and so on and so forth. But in terms of the on and off ramps, that's a tricky question, because every time you make an avenue for people to go on and off of crypto into fiat, that channel is going to be within some jurisdiction that varies drastically depending upon where it is and what that government cares about. So most of the time when you see like these prices, it's so difficult in places like Venezuela because they don't want it to happen.
Right.
They're trying to actively discourage it so they can try and do something with their economy, whether that be like taking advantage of their people, or they're trying to figure out something, or like, I don't know. Right. But like, that's inevitable consequence. And so if you would like to do something that facilitates on off ramps without like, that's more censorship resistant or resilient, then it has to be done in such a way where like a central authority doesn't have ownership of it. It needs to be run by a community. And if one of them shuts down, it doesn't kill the entire thing. So like, that's where decentralization comes into play, is you build the framework, the tools, the apps, and so on and so forth, and you give them away. You make sure they work as intended. You give them away so that each individual community that needs it can build it themselves, maybe a couple of them, so that the power distribution is distributed across those like widely, and a shutdown in one place doesn't affect the entire operation. And you can do that with blockchain, where you can't do it with other things like that, right? You can make a series of smart contracts and the apps that interact with them. You can give people the educational resources they need to deploy them, use them, build communities with them, give examples, and then you can like place people in specific places to help people get this done. And you have a much better, more resilient way of allowing people to kind of use this technology without nearly as many drastic consequences to the parties involved.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought this example up, because when we talk about this on Layer One Live, and we have these discussions on Layer One, it's purely, I think, from like a financial perspective, but and this might be outside of your realm of experience here, but how are these people doing, not only financially, because they're financially distressed, like Dimitri's saying, but like communicatively distressed? Is there some of that element going on in these countries that maybe we don't talk about, and how does status kind of help solve that?
Absolutely. So how am I going to say this? Most communication apps are completely surveilled, period. Like, if you're talking, someone else has the ability to read it if they're not doing it, if they're not harvesting it and reading it already. Like, it's because end-to-end encryption is a must with communication apps, whether or not you need the privacy or not. We'll take an example of this. So in Brazil, the main, for some reason or other, I don't know how it got there, but it's the way it is now, WhatsApp is the main communication app across the board in the country. It's businesses advertise themselves on WhatsApp. If you look at like a business sign, it'll say, hey, this is my business. You can contact us through this WhatsApp number, not a telephone number, not anything else. Doesn't matter. It's all through WhatsApp. And during a particular election, I forget which one off the top of my head, but like the government just turned off WhatsApp completely. They're like, we don't like the conversations that are happening. WhatsApp is no longer an option in this country.
They just cut off IP. Is that how that works?
I guess like probably to block the port or whatever. And so like that's an incredible asymmetry of power for what people rely on in both their business, their everyday communication, so on and so forth. It may be end-to-end encrypted, under the protocol it is, but it's probably not, based on who owns it. But like just the ability to shut it off and keep people from having the conversations that they need to, especially during times of an election, is terrible. And we've seen that in a myriad of other contexts and countries. If you look at China, there's an obvious censorship resistance and the ability to control what goes in and out Like it's colloquially known as the Great Firewall of China for a reason, because it's very difficult to route information in and out without the government saying it's okay. And Russia did the same thing in terms of just basically saying, we're no longer going to use the outside internet. We have our own internet. And if you like it or don't. And it's like, so the communications as the medium for facilitating anything you do within a community, whether it be like business, personal relationships, sending money overseas to your families, depending on what they're doing, like all this stuff, like it involves some type of communication about coordinating whatever you're doing. And that should be private. That should be secure by default. And then people have the ability to broadcast out or share stuff at their own will within their own context. And I can almost guarantee that 99% of what's currently going on and how people do it is not secure and not safe. There are a few alternatives which are gaining steam. And we're only now just having the conversation that like end-to-end encryption should be a thing. And you're seeing a lot of pushback from governing bodies that they don't want that because they lose the power to surveil and act accordingly of things that they deem as unworthy or like not appropriate.
That reminds me of kind of what Edward Snowden was saying. One of his quotes, one of my favorite quotes from him is, basically it's like, well, why do I need privacy if I have nothing to hide? It's like the same thing as saying, well, it's like saying, why do I need freedom of speech if I have nothing to say? So that's one of my like favorite quotes from him. But we completely kind of understand, the benefits of open communication, right? And, freedom of speech, so people can gather in, thoughts and like communicate without any restrictions from government. I know Russia, very well. I'm Ukrainian myself. So, over there, when you look at any type of opinions that, somebody provides publicly, those people get shut down, and those forums get shut down. So it's very centralized and controlled. What are your thoughts? Like, let's see on the other side, right? So the way this gets kind of sold to us is, hey, we're doing this to watch for terrorism, right? To watch for threats, right? So if we do switch, start switching to these private messaging and so on, right? What are some of the cons, right? Maybe that will promote some toxic communities gathering together where the central authorities that keep us protected might not, catch those things, right, as they occur, or as they're being planned. So like, what are your thoughts about, like, maybe what is the dark side of going private, and having these communications?
I love this topic.
Only the best on layer one.
Oh man, I love this topic. So you're right. It's a tool, and with any sufficiently powerful tool, you can do sufficiently powerful good or bad things. And it's important to keep in mind what you're enabling when you're doing this. But I've always been of the ilk that it's going to be developed, and it should be done with like a very solid intention, with heavily principled than not. And so you build these things and you try and push and enable the good, because there's a tremendous amount of good that can be done with allowing people to live their lives the way they want to and have the ability to opt out. In that process, we know like if you obfuscate well enough, like cryptography is incredibly powerful. It's the last bastion of defense for attackers. Like it's the last technology, in my opinion, where you like the overwhelming power is on the side of the defender. And all of this stuff is built on cryptography. And so that gives people who want to do bad things a lot more power to do them. But only in the realm of like how we look for it. So governments in a lot of aspects really want to do good. They really want to stop real bad people from doing bad things. And those pursuits are are great and wonderful and need to happen. But the technology is going to continue to grow. Zero knowledge proofs are going to get better. The amount of information they're going to be able to extract from like communications protocols and the internet is going to continuously decrease. And that doesn't mean that they need to insert backdoors into the protocol so they have overwhelming asymmetric power to do what they deem as good and bad. What it means is we need to work together so that we can help them figure out how to start looking for these things in different ways. Because humans are going to be humans. They're going to screw up. There's going to be forensics you can do in ways to find like quote unquote bad behavior. And so based on these new systems that give people ultimate security and privacy, we need to find better methods or different methods for finding people doing things we don't like. And that part comes from like community initiatives, like people who see it calling it out and reporting it appropriately, or there's other things that you can do, but like you can't stop the technology. It's going to happen. So we need to make sure that those of us who are building the technology are doing it appropriately with good ethics and principles, and facilitating those who'd like to try and stop bad from happening and understanding on how to do so.
Yeah, I thought the terrorism portion of kind of governments using that as an example of why we need to kind of have this governance surveillance, especially when it comes to blockchain and crypto, is kind of overreaching. I've always felt a little bit more sympathetic towards like children and under 18 and under 16 when you're creating decentralized products. You have the idea of, oh, we're going to create a decentralized YouTube. Well, then what happens when someone puts gore and nudity and all of these things that can be accessed by underage kids? I think that seems to me like more real than maybe the terrorist play where it's like 0.001% that's being used for these technologies. Did you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's the same thing. Like we talked about it earlier. Like you can build censored products on top of a censorship resistant foundation. Like YouTube has an incredible ability to censor what they don't want on their platform. The equivalent of YouTube on a decentralized platform will also have that power more often than not. You can choose to block certain types of content. In fact, you probably have better resolution on how you choose to block things when you build it on top of these newer systems. And it's more personal preference. And so once again, we're teaching people to start thinking about the things that they deem as risky, worthy, valuable, something they don't want in their lives, and giving them the tools and information to set it up accordingly, right? They can say, well, like I care about these things. I don't care about these things. I don't want to see this stuff. And whatever gets fed to them through whatever eventual machine learning algorithms that give recommendations is better. And so like, or the platform, the organization that facilitates this does a really good job of filtering accordingly or blocking out content they don't like. Now, that doesn't stop the content from existing on the foundational layer, but it's not getting the attention that it would normally get if it's just like broadcast everywhere. Like people can still, like in status, you can still block people. They can talk all they want, just they're not getting heard. And I think like not getting heard is a very powerful thing in our ability to kind of do that. And so you just build stuff on top of it that doesn't allow that message or badness to propagate with a small amount of effort.
I kind of wanted to get back to status here and how, and we had this conversation earlier, whenever you're getting humans together, whenever you're getting people together, there is some element of governance, and we've seen governance kind of take its place in the crypto discussion, in the blockchain discussion. So as far as status is concerned, from a technical level, from just a general level, how is it governed? Are there different nodes that other individuals can spin up and be part of this decentralized system? How is governance on the platform handled?
Okay, cool. So we have a few things here. One is governance of the organization and what power they have over the direction in which things get built. There's just like kind of governance on how the money is used, and then governance of the underlying like communications protocol. Organization itself is a heavily principled one, and that we strive to, in effect, make the organization not necessary whatsoever. Right, the eventual goal is to have the stakeholders involved of the network, which is basically SNT holders, have full control over what happens within the network, what gets funded, what gets developed, so on and so forth. Right, there will always be some, part of status that exists. So like keep the lights on, run the web page, host the APKs or binaries for the applications, things like that, do marketing, whatever. But their power over the entire network is going to be continually diminished over time. As it currently stands, most of that power lies with Jared and Carl. And we're finding ways of distributing this through using things like multisigs, playing with DAOs, finding ways of doing decentralized Kickstarters, things like this, where like what they say isn't the end all be all of what gets built and where the network grows. But in this earlier phases, is like they need to have something that works, that gets sustainable. So the economics of how money flows throughout the ecosystem is something that is like that drives the community in the right way. We're not there yet. We're going to continuously work on that. So that's the organization. The network, there isn't a lot of governance. We run nodes as status, which are basically relay nodes. They're called mail servers and status nodes, and they pass messages. Like your client on the mobile phone is a type of node. It's more of a light node and doesn't pass as many networks. Otherwise, you burn your resources incredibly fast, like your battery and your bandwidth and things like that. And anyone can run these things. We run them just because we can. We know how to do them. It serves as like a foundational support for the whole network. And then anyone can run them. Once again, there should be no reliance on status to make this thing work. So anyone can run a mail server, anyone can run a node and support the network and relay messages. And the more that happens, the more resilient the network is. Say if like for some reason status gets shut off, and the network just continues to operate as is. Everything's open source. People can build on it. Sorry. And over time, that'll get better, especially the discrepancy between nodes, right? So like right now, a mobile is a relatively light client, which means it doesn't relay messages across the network to like further obfuscate who's talking to who as much, because it's very limited in resources. Like bandwidth costs money, especially on certain data plans in certain parts of the world. And so like over time, we're making it so that a node is adaptive to the resources it has at hand. And it operates according to those resources and what the user wants. So for instance, your mobile phone, you're out and about and you're in a kind of a low bandwidth area. You don't have a lot of good signal. You'll move into like an ultra light client where you're just kind of passively leeching off the network to get the messages you want and care about. So you're not actively contributing to it, but you're getting the service you need to operate and communicate and transact and so on and so forth. But like say you get home, plug your phone in, you're on Wi-Fi, it can automatically switch to start relaying more messages, operating in a way that contributes back to the network, so on and so forth. And then further helps kind of the kind of security and privacy guarantees that we offer in the network. And that can all happen based on resources, which is kind of the fundamental variables here. And so that's kind of like the ultimate goal here, is to have a node that operates the way you want it to with the available resources. And that's through passing messages, that's through like passing transactions and operating with Ethereum nodes, all that stuff.
Yeah, it begs kind of like this question, or not really a question, but the observation that we have right now in the industry, where a lot of these, let's say, decentralized networks and dApps or whatnot, they'll use like AWS servers, right? Mm-hmm. Which is like kind of counterintuitive, because like, hey, listen, well, can't Amazon just shut down the servers and that's it? Like your network is done. So there's really not much of decentralization there, right? So I like what you guys are doing, obviously, with the fact that you can have mobile, use and have that contribute to the network as far as this decentralization goes. I wanted to ask you about, you mentioned you have basically kind of like a decentralized Kickstarter. I believe it's called Assembly.
Correct.
So
Simple.
yep. So you can tell me a little bit more about it. You can post an idea and you can get funded. Is it specifically an idea? Does it have to be that you're going to build on status or like on your network, or that could it be like, an idea of something different? Like I'm looking to start something just general in crypto. Like tell me a little bit more about it.
I mean, ultimately, it's whatever you want. You can say, hey, I'm looking for some money to go to the bar this weekend, and if someone wants to pay it, they can
Nice.
pay it. That's no issue there. And what currently exists is of version 1. There's a lot more functionality under the hood in terms of what the smart contracts are capable of. They're all built off of Giveth's initial implementation of liquid pledging, which is a way in which you can people can make proposals to do something, and then it can be funded, and you can make like hierarchical players within how that gets funded. So it gets funded over time based on milestones, and you can delegate the power to release those funds to people who are watching it, maybe a manager of some sort, so that you don't have to keep track of everything all the time. You can contribute to something and know that, like we saw in the ICO boom, was people made a proposal with not a lot of effort and getting a tremendous amount of funds up front. In some cases, the proposal was wonderful. The idea, the concept was great, but they got a bunch of money and then lost all the ambition to actually do it, right? Because this is what the VC model had figured out so long ago, is that no. You bleed the money to them based on their ability to deliver the product. And that's certainly not what happened in the ICO boom. And there's a lot of failed projects specifically because that funding model doesn't work very well. Luckily, we're not one of them. The symbol is the way it currently works is, submit a proposal, tell people how much money you need, why you're going to do it, so on and so forth, and it gets funded. You can fund it with any ERC20 token that gets automatically converted into SNT through the smart contracts, and using some kind of automatic decentralized exchanges to convert it and put it into SNT. Why? Because it's our token. We want to try and facilitate use of our token, and this is how it works. And then it gets funded, you get your money, and then what we can do in the later versions is start to implement some of those other functionalities in terms of managers, selective milestones, payouts over time. We want to it's a kind of a proof of concept now for us to fund internal things, or for the community to kind of signal what they think should be built. And once that gets more robust and we're comfortable with it, we can expand the feature set, start adding some more actors inside of it, and then play with that. And then do this kind of slowly but surely to make sure we do it in a secure way, so we don't dump a bunch of money in something that isn't going to work, doesn't have the right incentives, or has a fundamental flaw somewhere we didn't see, and all the money gets lost.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the example that you used on that the process is based on, but we have been experimenting, or at least following the experiment that is Moloch DAO and these meta cartels, where you have the idea of pledging to an actual pool of money, and that kind of socializes that pool, and you're able to spend that money on different projects and things like that. So I definitely think their community incentives are aligned there. I do want a couple examples. Have there been any pledges that have come through that have gained possibly a grant, or that's something that you've seen come through that kind of piqued your interest when it was pledged?
Oh yeah. So there's been a few things. I don't my plate is quite full in terms of where my priorities lie and what I spend my day-to-day doing. But when this happened, one of the projects that we had funded internally with core contributors was dApps. So that's our curation engine for finding decentralized applications in the ecosystem and displaying them up front through a leaderboard. Right. This leaderboard is done on a bonded curve. So in order to get placed on the leaderboard, you have to stake SNT. And the more that you stake, the easier it is for the community to downvote you. Right. So a downvote costs, or has an effect that's a variable of how much money that's currently in the system. So this It's on a bonded curve. So like what it tries to do is make the playing ground a little more fair for those who don't have as much money. So someone who can't come in just say, well, I'm number one because I have a bunch of money. I'm going to spend a bunch on marketing, drastically go to the leaderboards, and people not being able to say, well, this is garbage. It doesn't belong here. Right. And so there's some other game mechanics involved with like this kind of play in terms of how you stake and how like the effects on upvoting and downvoting. But eventually it's just a way to find dApps that people would like to be a part of. And a community then has the ability to adjust what that company thinks about themselves in terms of where they belong on a leaderboard. So this was initially funded through Status version 1, but then a symbol came along, and that core contributor said, well, I'm just going to develop this thing completely through a symbol. Made a proposal, it got funded, and now the development of V2 and adding a bunch of cool features to how that's done, maybe doing like status channels, doing the same type of mechanism. Because right now it's very difficult to find like where people are talking in the network. All public channels are freely accessible if you know the name of the public channel. If you don't, then it's kind of hard to find where you want to be talking and your communities you want to belong to.
There's no community rankings, essentially.
So doing something similar in terms of like, well, we love this community, so we're going to throw some money into it, and the community being able to upvote that and continue it so that you have this kind of very open, permissionless way of ranking a community, and then some funding mechanics along with it. So like as you upvote, you're upvoting with SNT. And so if someone says like, well, we're no longer doing this, we're going to remove ourselves from the leaderboard to like remove that associated marketing and discoverability, they get all that money. They get all that SNT back into their wallet. And so like there's some kind of games around that, and they can keep playing with these types of things, fun ways of finding discoverability and such a thing in communities and that's all done through a symbol. It's no longer something we support within the organization. And that's the goal, right? The things that we use within the community to do things should be funded by the community and what they want. And a symbol is a way for them to kind of broadcast that, and the associated community backing it and then funding it in a lot of ways. And so like it's not only is it signaling like you do see in Gitcoin and grants and things like that, it's also funding it like Gitcoin grants too. So it's kind of our method for that within the ecosystem.
Got it. That's an interesting game theory kind of mechanisms that you got going on there. And we definitely appreciate that answer. We kind of just crossed over an hour here, and this has been one of the best conversations I think we've had on Layer 1. So I do want to touch on one more thing with Status, and then maybe you take a outside look on or like an overview of kind of crypto in general. But let's talk about your community as it stands now. And you know, obviously there are some good examples of competitors, right? You talked about WhatsApp, there's WeChat, there's Telegram, all of these things. So you're essentially going to be growing a community, I'm assuming through like marketing in the crypto sphere, but you also want to pull out users from, you know, non-crypto avenues. So what's the goal as far as users go, and what's kind of the roadmap there? Do you have a strong community now of individuals? Kind of give us some data there, as well as the kind of the roadmap for users.
Okay. There's a couple there's a couple cohorts that we're actively trying to engage. And I'm not the go-to person within the organization on what exactly is happening here in terms of like marketing and user acquisition. But I know there's certain types of people we want to make sure we're providing a solution for. First one is going to be the crypto native people who are using decentralized applications, having wallets, using Ethereum, and want to do so on their mobile, all from one spot. I think we have a leg up here because it's a wallet you can do something with. It's not just a wallet that you use to somehow connect to things and fund awkwardly. It has the potential to be like where you manage your funds, where you talk with your friends, how you access the decentralized applications you want to interact with. And for more, I guess, meta or in vogue things that are happening like DeFi, you can do it all within Status. Like there's no, like if the application is compatible with our wallet, then you don't need to move it anywhere else. You can just do it all within Status. So not only can you talk with your friends or talk in a channel about specific applications, because every application has a dedicated channel to it automatically, You can manage your funds. You can invest in DAI and put it in savings bonds or whatever the myriad of things DeFi is doing right now, which is too hard to even keep up with. You do it all in status, right? And so like that's how we like capture that audience. We become the de facto interface to what anyone's doing inside of Ethereum, at least on mobile. And when desktop is ready, also on desktop.
Yeah, that's not.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, it's like, and that's one cohort. That's a large cohort, and they're really hard to serve because there's a tremendous amount of features and functionality that people want. So we have to keep it general. We have to keep it useful, and we have to keep it secure. Because if you have a browser and something, it has to be secure. Browsers and managing funds together is something you need to be very, very, very cautious about. And we're definitely taking our steps carefully to make sure that what we put out as a product doesn't get users' funds stolen, right? And so that takes a while. But the other cohort is people who need this real means of security and privacy for communications. That can't attach their phone number when starting a chat application. Maybe because they don't have one, maybe because that's being surveilled or it's really easy to take over. In most cases, SIM swapping is a serious issue. And so having your phone number as a proxy for your identity is a bad thing. People don't want that. They shouldn't have to have it as a hard requirement. And so those are the types of people we want to serve too. Or like giving people the opportunity to be as pseudonymous or anonymous as possible when chatting with people, and knowing for a fact that the people they're chatting with is the only people who are reading those messages. Like that has to be a very strong guarantee of our network. And then they can selectively add whatever they want to that. They can say, I'm going to buy an ENS name and give myself a findable username that's easy to read. Or I'm gonna test on various places so that people understand where to find me on this application and what wallet address is associated with it, so they can look at the finances of that thing. And so like you start from like ultra privacy and security and then branch out based on what people want to be doing. But like if you want to give people the option to opt out, it has to start with that. And then you can build whatever else you want on top of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I was going to mention also that, about the DeFi in your app, you can hit up compound, right? You can, you can earn interest. That's fantastic. You can do that all from one
we went on like a campaign looking at various amounts of like different DeFi applications that were popular. And I started just like playing with a bunch of them in the app and then making, interest on the DAI that I was holding just within the app. And I just open it up, see it. All right, cool. It's safe. Good. And we'll move it back. You can move it back and forth. It was actually, I was really pleased with how fast it worked and how well it worked. And I want this experience that I'm having on my phone everywhere. Like it should just be that easy to manage your finances, to interact with applications that help you do cool things or interact with cool people in new ways. It should all be in one experience. And like, whether it's on the mobile or on the desktop. And right now it's not. You have to do a bunch of extra stuff. And so like our goal is to provide all of that ability for people to do the myriad of cool things you can do on the internet or like Web3 within one context that's easy and intuitive.
Absolutely. So kind of let's pull out, as we kind of head towards the end of the episode, and usually what we ask our guests is, what are some of the hot sectors that you see right now that are picking up in crypto, maybe outside of what we've talked about, which is kind of privacy? Do you have, kind of something that's piquing your interest, saying, you're seeing something, hey, this is actually growing pretty quickly, maybe quicker than I thought. It's getting very popular in our industry.
So most of my focus tends to not look too much at too many user applications. Like just based on what I'm responsible for, I'm usually diving deep into like underlying protocol stuff and scalability issues and usability issues at like the fundamental layer, like making sure like people understand how to manage their keys and stuff. And the cryptography associated is strong. But like there's so many cool things that are happening when I pick my head up, or like I have an interview on the Bitcoin podcast, or I'm like, oh, what? You can do this now? Like, for instance, like games are something that I love in this space for a few reasons, and they're blowing up and they're getting better. Mostly, I think, because the NFT technology and ecosystem has grown quite a bit, and what you can do with NFTs is even way bigger than games. Games are the playground across the board for how you figure out how this stuff works in the first place. NFTs basically came from CryptoKitties, and then it exploded. People started finding a bunch of really cool things to do with a non-fungible token, and how you do attributes to them, and how you breed them, and how you change them and morph them and keep track of them. And so, like, the supply chain industry, which is ridiculously huge across the globe, is heavily dependent upon how well NFTs work and how well you're able to keep track of them over time. So, like, but you need a playground to figure this stuff out, and gaming is exactly that. It allows people to figure out the economics, the technology, the transfer, the kind of how this stuff works, the auditability, all the stuff in a way that's not as risky as the supply chain industry, to develop standards, then actually do tremendous amount of really cool stuff in the real world, and like make things that we do now much more efficient and better, and a better distributed power and all that good ideal stuff, right? But at the end of the time, you're having fun, you're playing games, you're potentially earning money on the human effort you're putting into them, which is something you really couldn't do in the past. Like, at least if not the way the developer wanted you to. See, Chinese gold farms and things like that.
Yeah. We had, if you're interested in NFTs, we actually talked with Devin Finzer from OpenSea, who runs that NFT marketplace, and he had this. He talked about this idea of unbundling an asset from a game, which is not something that you have ever seen in anything outside of blockchain, essentially, which is just, if you have an asset, like in any type of game, let's go with Pokemon, for example, that Pokemon lives within inside that game. It doesn't, you can't do other things with that thing, or it can't be ported into another game. It can't be unbundled from the actual game. So really cool. NFTs also allow people to understand how to lose a lot of money. Because I lost a lot of money on CryptoKitties. But no, it was funny when you guys were having that conversation about what could be, going on within Status. I would love to see an evolution of maybe NFT trading within Status, where you're trading, NFT stickers or NFT GIFs within Status, which is essentially a messaging app. And obviously we know about stickies and memes and GIFs that proliferate on these messaging apps.
That's an eventuality. It has to be, just based on what it's providing and what people want to be doing. But like, we currently have them. They're called stickers, or sticker packs within Status. So like, we've implemented a dual NFT system in terms of, one, the ownership of the pack. And so like, who receives the proceeds of stickers when they're bought? That's an NFT that can be traded, and like what will eventually be an open market. So anyone can make sticker packs, submit them, have them bought, and then potentially earn money from them. Right now it's controlled by us, and the next stage of it, it'll be completely open and not controlled by us in any way. And then the actual license to use it within the application is also an NFT. So if there's like a rare set of sticker packs that cost a lot of money, and there's only 4 of them, the ownership of who has the license to use them can also be traded with it on an open registry. So that's just one way of doing stickers in a new way, which people love. Like, look at Line. That's their main revenue driver. But Line makes all the money, not the artists who are creating the stickers. So we want to change that. But like, a difficulty here, because if everyone has all these NFTs and they want to manage them and use them, they need a wallet that displays them and allows them to move them around. And that's not nearly as easy as an ERC-20. We don't have decentralized exchanges. We don't have third party, and like pulling that information from the blockchain on a technical level is much more difficult. And so if we want to keep Status as independent as possible without relying on third parties like OpenSea. OpenSea is wonderful. They do a very good job providing information for people who want to know who has what in their wallet, without the wallet developers having to like do a bunch of extra stuff that's difficult. but you rely on them, and we don't want to do that. And the standards aren't good enough, and the infrastructure isn't good enough in the Ethereum ecosystem for us to do that. And so that's work that needs to be done. And whenever this stuff happens, we have to end up doubling back and trying to build the associated infrastructure and methods for pulling this information so that the owner has full control over things and no reliance on third parties. Because anytime you ask OpenSea, and don't get me wrong, I love OpenSea. They're doing a great job. But it's just the natural consequence of that client server model, right? Anytime you ask them or poll them for something, you're giving them a tremendous amount of information about yourself, what you have, and who you're talking to. And once again, if we want people to opt out, we have to start from a completely like secluded space that has no reliance on third parties. And when a user wants to, they can opt into those things for whatever convenience that they may want. So like turning on the ability to see NFTs in your wallet through OpenSea has to be a switch and not something fundamentally baked in to how we do stuff. It's like we're definitely keeping track of those things. We want to do them. It has to be done, but it has to be done correctly. And we're not willing to make those compromises.
Yeah, one of the conversations we had with Devin is that these are essentially Web3 assets on Web2 platforms. So that's exactly what you talked about. So Dr. Corey Petty, this has been a fascinating discussion, man. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I think we covered a lot of topics. We covered status, we covered privacy, we covered so many things, as often is the case with these longer episodes. We had a lot of fun. I guess my last question before we ask you our basic book recommendation question is what do you make of this ton development, this Telegram token development, and what's happened over the past months, but also the past week, where they've kind of given up, on this idea that they were going to have a cryptographic token?
I think what they were trying to do, and this is coming from somewhat like of a naive and ignorant standpoint. I haven't looked at too much at Ton or talked to people about it. And so like take that with a grain of salt and if you think about it during the timing of here, is that they were trying to latch on to a hype cycle that was never going to last. And based on the way that they're built and the amount of money that they tried to raise, they became the obvious target of regulation and how to do these things appropriately within some jurisdiction. And it was just that inevitably led to some failure. Like they weren't going to be able to do it based on how they did it, who they were, and when they did it. And I'm not sure they had the resources available to do it correctly in the first place. So I don't know. I mean, maybe there's something they can do in the future. But like, I think we've started and built it from the ground up in a way that's sustainable, trying to offer up a better idea of what they thought they were going to offer in the first place.
Yeah, it was kind of doomed from the start, it seems like, and they were trying to capture that cycle of hype, but I guess it got overhyped, and that brought in the bounty on their head, basically, from regulators.
Yeah, because for all I know, like it could have ended up being a really good solution and worked and done what they wanted it to do for their users. Because Telegram is a very huge platform that a lot of people use, especially within the crypto community. I don't know enough, and based on like kind of just general trends, it's very difficult to do right, having started what they already had.
Absolutely.
Kick did the same thing, right? Like when they announced their token.
Exactly. Yeah. We know how that went. But yeah, so as we were wrapping up, just like you mentioned, the question that we ask at the end to all our guests is a book recommendation. It could be related to crypto, it could not be related to crypto. One of your favorite books that you read that kind of had maybe an impact on you, or it was just, a cool fiction.
I've got two of them actually.
Nice.
And these came from interviews that I had done on the Bitcoin podcast that were a surprise to me. Our publisher found both of these people, and they're people that I should have known about, and I didn't. And I'm very happy that I met them and I know about them now. The first one was Cory Doctorow's Radicalized. It's 4 novellas about somewhat dystopian consequences of the technology we're building today and how we as humans interact with them. I'm fascinated with this concept of social implications of the technology we choose to use. This does a very good job of painting specific pictures, very much Black Mirror-ish, of what can happen. The next one is Carl Schrader's Stealing Worlds. It's a short novel about kind of Ready Player One-ish world, but I think he paints a universe of where this technology can take us wonderfully, and the powers within and how they interoperate with each other. It's a wonderful novel of the technology we're trying to build in this ecosystem in terms of decentralization and what economies could look like if it works out, and who the people are and how they conduct themselves and the freedoms they have or don't have. So like those two, I highly recommend to anyone who's interested in this technology and what the worlds can look like if we're successful in building them.
Yeah, I'm always down for a good metaverse book, so I appreciate those two recommendations.
Love them.
The last thing, let the viewers and listeners out there know where to find more about Status as well as yourself.
Yeah, sure. You can find me on Status. So you can get the app, Status IM, or the iOS App Store and Android App Store. Just go download it, start a new chat, type in Petty, Petty, and that's me. You can find me real quick, or just join one of the public channels that I'm in. And I try and actively contribute to those as well. Or you can find me on Twitter at Corpetty, CORPETTY, or on the Bitcoin Podcast Network, where I spend a tremendous amount of my time talking to various people about various things on various shows, and am quite active in that community as well, obviously. So there's a Slack involved there. So if you're interested in like having more one-on-one conversations and don't want to get Status for some reason, you can go there.
Awesome. Dr. Corey Petty, everyone. I am going to be an avid follower of the Bitcoin Podcast after this discussion. So you gained
Thanks.
one new follower there. We'll hope to have you on in the future. Best of luck with Status and all your future endeavors.
Thanks, guys. This is really fun.
Hey guys, we hope you enjoyed today's episode. Make sure to check out Layer 1 on all the audio and video platforms listed in the description. Thanks for stopping by, and we'll see you next week.